boys and girls, Bruce here, and I'm going to be just doing a 6-month review of the Helix. I haven't done a full review of the Helix since I've owned it. I thought what would be different about this review than some of the others I do, which I tend to get the gear for a couple of weeks and use it for a couple of weeks and then do the review, is actually to give it 6 months. 6 months of gigging with this amp, 6 months of really getting my teeth into it and finding out any flaws or any things that I think are brilliant, and give you a kind of insight as to how I use it and why I think it's good or bad, who knows. And a few of the things that I'd like to maybe see on the Helix, but I'm guessing the things that I want are probably never going to happen, which is a real shame because it would require a new unit. But you never know, maybe in the future. I've been using the Helix very extensively at gigs, all kinds of gigs over the last 6 months, from corporates, weddings, pub gigs, club gigs. I've used it in a number of different combinations. So the first combination, which is the easiest combination and where the Helix really excels in portability, which is something that I'm really big into and it's a massive importance to me. Just plug directly into the front of house and I get a feed through a monitor or a full range monitor, which is actually my own monitor that I take along. That is scenario number one. Scenario number two is I've used it into a Marshall power amp, a valve stave power amp, into a cabinet of my choice, which has either been a 2x12 or mostly a 1x12 with a vintage 30 in it. So in that case, it's a kind of half and half scenario where we're using some of the amp modeling, but primarily none of the IRs because we're already going into a cabinet. And the third situation is running the Helix basically as a pedal board straight into my Blues Junior. And I have to say, in terms of portability, that is probably the most portable because my Blues Junior is a little bit easier to manage and a little bit lighter than my Electro Voice full range cabinet. But that kind of defeats the object of the Helix, because as we know, we just want it to be the ultimate portable machine that for many gigs you can just turn up with a Helix, plug into the front of house, get your monitor feed and you are good to go. I happen to really like the sound of the Helix into the Blues Junior. The pedals sound really great, the drives sound really great, everything sounds really going into what essentially is a clean platform, and you get the plus point of, I guess, what we all love about tubes, which is the warmth and the saturation you get from the power tube saturation when you're really driving those tubes, which is easy to do on the little tiny Blues Junior. So to me, currently, that's my favourite situation, but it's still, I'm trying more and more just to keep using it as intended. And the key thing to get into my head, and I did a video on this and I recommend you check it out, is something that I always have to keep reminding myself. When you're listening to the Helix through studio speakers like these or through a monitor, it is the sound of an amp in a room that has been mic'd up. It is not the sound of an amplifier in the room with you. That's a very different sound. That's a very different experience. And I feel that particularly with recording in the studio, the Helix works fantastically well. There are some fantastic models in there and you can keep jumping in day after day and finding new things and tweaking things. Don't be put off. I know that you have to tweak to get a good sound out of it. I feel what the biggest plus point for me about the Helix, aside from the portability, is how easy it is to program. It's an absolute cinch. Line 6 have really got to grips with what people really want out of an interface, almost the old scale tactility of being able to turn knobs. You select your distortion, you have the knobs in front of you, you can turn them to your heart's content. I've been setting up patches is based on my live setup. So I've picked a clean, most of the time I picked a clean Fender amp, the Fender Deluxe model, which I really like, and then just stuck a whole bunch of pedals in front of it and behind it, such as the reverb and delay after the amplifier. And I'm getting my dirt and crunch and everything, boost and compression from the pedals with inside the Helix. I have experimented on a few gigs of using separate amplifiers to get kind of really dirty sounds or certain types of sounds appropriate to the songs that I'm playing. I found that that requires a bit more tweaking, primarily to get patch levels correct. One of the tricky things is getting your patch levels to really blend. So for ease of use and even the practicality in the situations I've been in, I've just tended to use drives into a clean amp, so using it as a almost like as a pedal basis. And I love the sound of the vintage Fender US Deluxe amp model. I've also been using the PRS model that's in there. That sounds really great. I do love Interstate. That's probably one of my favorites. I have used it a few times live. Again, that's the patch that tends to get a bit louder. Presence and the body of the sounds great when you're trying it at home, even at louder volumes at home, but I haven't managed to get it to set exactly how I want it in a live environment. After all these gigs, you know, this is a unit that's working really well. I've got one issue that I've been having, but it isn't a problem with the Helix, it's actually a problem with the monitoring, where the sound, it feels like after you drive the monitor for some time, it sounds like there's an inherent problem maybe with the speaker. The sound becomes a little bit brittle, which can be a little bit off-putting when you're picking. It doesn't have any body to it that seems to have that. It's just like you're losing part of the body and the attack of the signal. You just end up with this kind of brittle, kind of clicking sound. I need to investigate that further, but it looks like it's coming from the monitor, because that's the only thing that's changing over time during a gig. It's getting hotter and there might be a heat issue there. But aside from that, the Helix, particularly with the clean sounds, I find works fantastically well doing it. All that kind of soul stuff. Fantastic. With the recent update to 2.30 and the inclusion of the EP booster, I've been able to get a really lovely kind of crunch tone coming up. They're just on the verge of breakup. So I'm really loving that, and that's working immensely well. What's really exciting about this is the potential. In the last couple of months, I've been experimenting with running multiple cabs, multiple amps. That works fantastically well. My little tip that I've been doing quite a lot of recently is something where you run maybe the US Deluxe cab with a bass model blended in below it, and you get a real nice body and a real nice presence coming from the bass amp. Something I want to experiment more on. I will probably no doubt do a video about that, because I'm finding that really exciting. effects you can have and the way you can stick effects in parallel and series and have multiple chains of effects doing different things, that's, you know, an absolutely massive thumbs up. In a sense, the possibilities are limitless. So as you can probably tell, I really love my Helix. It's been an absolute great piece of gear. I didn't think I would ever really go full modeling. I've tried so many over the years and they haven't really worked. The Helix is certainly working for me really well. I still do like my Blues Junior, and running it with dirt pedals, there's just something visceral about that. I can't really explain, and that's the thing I guess many of us can explain. It's not a criticism, it's just a difference. I like love the reliability of the Helix. It's there. I've had no problems apart from one, so this is a little negative. I seem to be having a few issues with the expression pedal. First of all, squeaking, and then getting really stiff. So I'm going to have to put some kind of lubricant on there to see what happens, but I'm a little bit disappointed. I mean, I'm not a heavy wire user. I haven't been using it too often, but it seems to get really stiff and you've kind of got to work it and it starts creaking. And speaking of which, I'm not the biggest fan of the wires so far. I need to do some more experimenting with the wires, but the wires just aren't cutting it for me. They seem to be too peaky. I've adjusted a lot of the settings on the fly, but I can't get the kind of body that I want from the wire, unfortunately. But again, I'm open to trying it out a bit more and giving it the benefit of the doubt a bit more, and probably trying out a few more things when I'm at home rather than in a live environment. The delays sound awesome. I do have a Strymon timeline, which I have patched in occasionally. What can I say? It would be nice maybe if there were a few newer types of delays and some things coming on the lane. I've found in practice that you do need to spend time getting your effects levels right, particularly with modulations. There's a tendency for them to disappear, but you have the individual boost or level controls which you need to adjust. And it does take a bit of fine tuning in a live environment, but for home use, it's really easy. And I do feel it's quite easy to set up patches, and I know there's been criticism from some circles that you can't get a good sound about it, you can't get a good tone about it. I would encourage you to find the tone that you're looking for, find your favorite guitarist, look at their settings and set it up exactly the same. Try the same amp if you've got the model here, add in the effects, add in the settings, and see where you go from there and tweak. There are some things you need to do by standard, and a lot of that revolves around the EQ. I find that you need to cut the EQs down so it's very much in line with what you'd expect from a speaker cabinet. So you roll off the high end and you roll off the bottom end. So the bottom end maybe up to around 80 or 100 hertz if it's a bit too boomy, but I always do that. I'm pretty much, well, I have that set up as the global EQ, and then down to around 8 or 9K for taste. See how you get on with that, but that's a crucial thing that you probably need to do to make it sound as realistic as possible. And you do get some digital noise and harshness, but that's inherent in a system, and you'd get that in any system, a digital system anyway, so that's not a problem with the Helix. And the more modeling you add and the more things you're doing, the more of the maths is allowing some of these high frequencies to come in. So all you do is just cut them out. It's the easiest thing to do. It's not a problem with the unit. Just cut them out and you're good to go. If you had a full range speaker with certain amps, you would still hear that as well. It's just that we're used to hearing amps in combos or in cabinets where the speakers aren't handling those frequencies anyway. If they were, you'd probably hear the noise as well that people are complaining out on the fizziness. What would I like after all this time? I would love there to have been a built-in wireless system, so something like the G30 built in. These are the things that aren't going to happen, but it would have been nice, or an option where you could have the Line 6 Helix wireless. That would be awesome, so I don't have to plug in my wireless system, find another plug for it, all those kind of things. It would all be contained within one unit. That would be awesome. I should add, I have been using a pedal board extension. The tuner on the Helix isn't terrible, but it's not great. And I think tuners are very much something of personal preference. And personally, I just don't like it. I like my Polytune. I trust my polytune more, maybe just because I've had so much longer with it. I just believe it more, and it works more in way that my head works. So I've built a little side pedal board where I've also then added on two additional drives. So it's usually one drive, but I'm doing some reviewing here. So I've added in, currently I've got the Golden Brownie, the X5 Golden Brownie, and the Ibanez Tube Screamer. The drives on the Helix are fantastic. There's no denying they are really fantastic. But there is just something about plugging an analog drive which it's just that thing. It's just that little bit of, I guess it's something about the harmonics that it adds, that just the way that the Fourier transforms are working and the DSP are working, that just add a little something. It's minimal. And again, probably a lot of it comes down to psychoacoustics in my own mind, that it's telling me that this is sounding better when it probably, in a blind test, I probably wouldn't notice. But it's not a big deal. I've got this little annex pedal board where I have my tuner, I've got the wireless, and I can plug in a drive or two should I want to. No problem whatsoever. No big deal. It's not a criticism about the Helix. It's just something that I find works for me at the moment. Which leads me on to my next point, which I would love, and I would love to see this on any multi-effects unit, would be a power supply, just a 9-volt out or a daisy chain out, 9-volt out, where you could plug in some external pedals. So you only need one IEC plug. You plug your Helix in and then you can just daisy chain off a couple of pedals. Wouldn't that be awesome? That would be the best thing in the world. Whether or not it would ever happen in a unit, I don't know. I don't think it would be that hard to, I mean, it would make the unit a little bit heavier because you'd have to have some elements of the power supply and some changes to the power supply happening. But that would be so freaking cool if you could just run your pedals off of one power supply, because there's nothing worse than having tons of power supply cables needing to go everywhere. All in all, the Helix is a keeper. It's done a really great job over the last 6 months. Really happy with it. Don't think I could be happier. I'm sure there'll be a new piece of gear that comes out in a couple of years' time which I would jump on board and buy, but it is a great piece of unit. The potential, what you can do with it, is just amazing. To a certain extent, it's almost limitless, the way you can route effects, and never getting bored of just playing with the unit, finding new sounds, doing some sound design, coming up with things and being creative. Oh, I should say as well, the looper's good. It's a good tool and I recommend trying it out. I still prefer, again, to use my Boss, primarily because I'm also really bad at hitting the foot switches. So having big foot switches is something which is a plus for me. So not necessarily a criticism about the Helix, but it would be nice if you could store loops as well, that, you know, something, or find a way of exporting them if you've come up with a really good idea. What are your thoughts on Helix? Look forward to hearing from you. Please leave some comments in the box below and I will catch you later. Hi there, boys and girls, Brucey here. Just wanted to say a massive thank you for checking out my channel. Please do subscribe if you like what you see here. Please do fire away any questions you might have. More than happy to answer them. And if you are in the mood, please do check out my guitar creativity book, which has a whole wealth of information on ways that you can be creative and develop your technique and develop your playing in new and interesting ways. Catch you later.